By the time I was 18 years old, I was smoking cigarettes, I was snorting cocaine, I was snorting crystal meth, and I was freebasing, all in the same day.
A former addict turned successful entrepreneur, Joe Polish is the founder of Genius Recovery and Genius Network, a network of high-achieving entrepreneurs.
What we really do our best to cultivate is to make sure that when you want something and you show up, that your give is equal to or greater than your want.
In this episode, we explore what's broken in our society, what's fueling the opioid crisis that is killing 100,000 Americans a year, and how to rebuild connection, community, and purpose.
Don't ask the question, why the addiction, but why the pain?
All addiction is a response to trauma, Joe says, and that's where the focus of recovery should be.
I believe life gives to the giver and takes from the taker.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Joe Polish, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Jan, really, thank you.
You're, of course, run something called Genius Network, very ambitiously named. And I was honestly a little bit suspicious because I've seen a lot of entrepreneurship groups, and they all purport to be all benevolent and everything. And then I would check them out a little bit, and it didn't seem as benevolent as it was sold at. Okay, but right. You did invite me to come for a day to Genius Network, and it was honestly very surprising because basically 100% of the people that I talked to, if they did, if they wanted to have some sort of further interaction, they came offering something to me.
Yeah. And
it was very stark. Not a single person asked me for anything.
Yeah.
Rare.
Yes, very.
So tell me about this network that you've created. Yeah.
Well, so this is many years in the making. I mean, I started I had a carpet cleaning business back in 1990, and for 2 years I lived off credit cards and I was broke, and I also, prior to that, and we can get into it, I was a drug addict. I mean, I was struggling with addiction, so my entrepreneurial endeavors were very difficult. I got into a business that nobody wants to buy, and I had to figure out how to successfully connect with people and how to sell something nobody wants to buy. So fast forward to today, many years later, over 30 years I've been in business, and I have a connection network. And so what I was starving for as a kid, as growing up, was connection. And when it comes to business, it's really about bonding. It's really about connecting, but connecting with who? Who are you aligned with? And so the Genius Network is really a connection network of high-level entrepreneurs that want to meet each other and want to share. We've cultivated a group of givers. I mean, my goal and objective is to have the most non-narcissistic group of achievement-focused, high-level entrepreneurs that are givers.
Well, that's very interesting, because it did strike me like you have to. Everybody that's there is obviously like very type A, highly motivated, already doing good stuff, but somehow. You puts this idea of giving of themselves in the first position, which is definitely counterintuitive to a lot of people. And I suppose so how does I'm sure you get a ton of people who are looking to game the system that come in.
Oh, all the time, yeah. And we have to oftentimes kick people out. We'll have conversations with people. I mean, everyone's got something to sell. Everybody wants something. That's one thing I realize. I mean, I want something, you want something, we all want something. Humans want something. There's nothing wrong with wanting something. However, what we really do our best to cultivate, and I think we've done a really good job, and it's taken a lot of work, is to make sure that when you want something and you show up, that your give is equal to or greater than your want. Because the people that we like in life that are our friends, if you think about all the personal relationships that you have, anyone that's watching this, think about the people that you like the most when they call you on the phone or they text you or however they communicate with you, and you get this feeling of, woo, I'm so happy that I'm getting communicated to by this person, versus the whole ah feeling is because they usually are takers. They're not showing up with a give, they're showing up with a take. And so what we do in Genius Network is we really emphasize that there's nothing wrong with pursuing opportunities. You're all people that are here to reach your opportunities, deal with your challenges, deal with your problems, get better as an entrepreneur, build, bigger businesses. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, you all have an opportunity, but there's a difference between pursuing an opportunity versus being an opportunist. And so that whole energy of like, oh, someone's trying to take something from you, I hate that. And marketing is important. Selling is important. You know, think of selling as influence and think of marketing as storytelling. So how do you tell a better story? How do you do it in a way to where you're connecting with people? Because I make the distinction, there's connectors and then there's connectors. People that connect by conning people. And they're very manipulative, and that doesn't feel good.
It's fascinating. And, you know, like I'll mention, you know, people pay a lot to participate in having to give.
Yes.
But I guess it's for the benefit of being among these like-minded people. It's a surprising model, I suppose.
Well,
right?
yeah, and it's interesting for some people, because certainly if I gave Genius Network away for free, and here's the secret, I love what I do. I would still do Genius Network even if I didn't charge for it. Because what is a Genius Network? It's a group of people that have skills and capabilities in a particular area that they share with each other. Everyone can have a Genius Network. And in a lot of ways, that's just what I call it. I just happen to have a business and a group called Genius Network. And it's $35,000 a year now for the lower level group, and it's $100,000 a year for the higher level group.
It's like, I think for most people, right? I mean, for me, it's just like, wow, that's a sizable investment. Right?
I'll explain it though,
Yeah,
because I can also tell people, you know, the formula for how much you should charge for something. I always use this as a bit of a trick. People are like, how much do you charge for something? Because again, I used to be a carpet cleaner. How much do you charge for carpet cleaning? What is price? What does that even mean? And so the formula for how much you charge for something is based on your ability to sell it. That's the formula. You know, when someone buys a $200 Timex watch, or I don't even know if Timex watches, maybe they're $50, I have no idea, or an Apple watch, or they buy a Rolex for 10 grand. Are they buying a watch or are they buying jewelry? If you're buying a purse or a handbag at Louis Vuitton versus, you know, what are you actually buying? Are you buying status? So there's all kinds of things with price. Now, as it relates to groups and what people invest in, most people that come to Genius Network, they have to be at a high enough level. I mean, from a just revenue standpoint, they got to make at least $1 million a year in their business even to come to my group. People that are not, I have books, I have courses, I give most of the stuff away for free. I have podcasts I've done for years. I've videos online. So I have this whole thing where I have high level, higher priced services, products, groups, and then I give a lot of stuff away for free just to expose people to it. But here's the key. Most people that come to the group, they're not paying for who's in the room, they're paying for who's not in the room. And because we don't have that annoying factor of people that are trying to constantly sell them something, there's a safety, there's a sense of they can kind of relax because they're not going to get hit up. Because we have some very high level people in the group, and they can't go to some events without constantly getting mobbed. And so that's what Genius Network provides. It's a space where you can come and deal with your not only business issues, but their life issues. Because I tend to think about sell people what they want, give them what they need. You know, the ego part of us, the part that wants to pursue financial success, wants more money, best-selling books, meet high-level people, status, but what they often need is better sleep, get rid of all of what I call half relationships, hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating relationships, and replace them with people that are easy, lucrative, and fun. Replace activities with ELF versus half, easy, lucrative, and fun versus hard, annoying, lame, and frustrating.
Yeah, I remember learning about these acronyms at the event, and I mean, to its credit, you know, I was there. You know, I didn't know most. Actually, it was actually very interesting. I met a number of people that are fans of the show, which was fantastic to see.
Yeah.
Right. But a lot of people I didn't know, and I think at least 3 people that I can think of offered something that, you know, while it hasn't manifested yet, is kind of on the road to being something I think quite constructive for Epoch Times, for myself. So no, it was and frankly, it changed my mind that something like this could even exist.
Yes. Well, right. That's what I hear all the time. People are like, I've never been into a group like this. I'm usually going somewhere and everyone's just trying to sell something. And so if we can remove that sort of pressure or that icky feeling, you can create an environment where even people that I would say behave in a certain way, if they come into a particular environment, they're going to behave differently. And why I know this so well is I've sat in hundreds of 12-step meetings for my own recovery. And you can see people go into those types of environments and they are a different person than when they're not in there. And I see them get better. You can create an environment that gets people to become more aware, to become better. And that's what we do our very best to do in Genius Network. And I encourage other people to do it. And I think we help people become better givers. Hard to do with sociopaths, hard to do with psychopaths, hard to do with, really traumatized narcissists. So I look at the people I associate with, the groups that I do. Does it expand me or does it contract me? I don't want to contract people. I want to expand people. And that's why you have to, if you're running a group and you care about everyone having as powerful and as useful of an experience, you have to be useful for yourself. You have to put useful people in the room. And I believe life gives to the giver and takes from the taker.
Before we continue, we have a sponsor for today's episode. The stock market's been betting on the Fed cutting rates in March, but all three indices got pummeled on news that cuts were off the table. Is this why JP Morgan and UBS are calling for a 23% drop in the S&P? Signs of a recession are everywhere, and inflation is eroding the value of your savings. In times of uncertainty, you can protect your retirement, as I do, and secure your wealth by investing in gold. Call Patriot Gold Group today, mention American thought leaders, and you'll always get the best service. Patriot Gold Group was Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer for 7 years in a row. They have a no-fee-for-life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver. Scan this QR code on the screen below or call the toll-free number 888-857-0495 and get a free investor guide today. Again, that's 888-857-0495. I believe that as well. And so you've just touched on two things I want to really kind of develop in our talk today, in our chat. One of them is just, going back to the beginnings. You experienced a lot of childhood trauma. You've dealt with it in initially, not so good ways. Right. I want to kind of just get you to give us your story. But the other part is you've kind of turned that into another piece of Genius, is this recovery network. Yeah. And this, I think, pretty unique approach you have to dealing with addiction and these kind of various vices that people get caught up in. But let's start with your story. I know you've told it probably 1,000 times, or more than that. But it's a good one.
Yeah. And what I'll say, Jan, is when I tell my story too, I had a lot of crazy stuff happen. I didn't have a happy childhood. It was pretty miserable, and I was scared, and I was afraid, and it was not fun. And I also tell myself, don't get caught up in woundology, because we live in this world where people often use their stories and their pain, and they'll use it to gain empathy or sympathy, and they use it to manipulate people. And I always caution people, share your story, but don't become your story. I mean, maybe everyone is their story at a certain point, but my goal is to just increase my level of awareness and consciousness and never use bad things that have happened to me as a way to just get people to be like, oh, poor Joe, he went through some difficult stuff. Because everyone watching this, everyone has had pain and challenges and angst and exposure and probably betrayals and abandonment, and oftentimes it's mental, physical, sexual, there's abuse. So I just want to say that in the very beginning. So my story, some of the key points that were, as my friend Dr. Don Wood, he's one of my Genius Network members, he has this great line: if you understood the atmospheric conditions of somebody's life, it would make sense why they do what it is they do. And I think about that like everyone. Think of all the people in the world, I won't name names right now, that are doing pretty bad stuff, that are lying, that are in high positions of power. If you went and looked at if you went to the atmospheric conditions of their life, it would, that's what influence this person. That's what's caused them to become who they become. And I believe as an adult, we can not only reframe our atmospheric conditions, we can change them. And if we do that, then it changes the atmosphere of our families, our business, our communities. So for me, like some of the main things, my mother was a former nun. My father met my mother in church. She had left the convent. The story I had been told is because she'd gotten ill. And so they met, they ended up getting married. My father, had found the love of his life. They're very poor, early on. My father was a locksmith, and, my mother died when I was 4 years old. So this was in 1972. and she's 41 years old from ovarian cancer. And it just broke my father's heart. He was just devastated, and he never recovered from it. So every year to 2 years, my entire childhood, we would move to different parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And as soon as he would establish a little bit of a clientele in a emergency service business, being a locksmith, it was, you get calls in the middle of the night, couples kicking someone out, drunk drivers, lock their keys in their car. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff, robberies, break-ins. So it wasn't an easy business. But he would establish a certain level of clientele, then he would uproot us and we move to another town. And so I never had long-term friendships, and I was very scared. I smiled all the time, and everyone thought I was a happy kid, but I was a scared kid. I was frightened, I was small, I was skinny, I got bullied, picked on all the time. And then between the ages of 8 to 10 years old, I started getting sexually molested by someone that was a male. And I was paid money not to say anything. So I was raped and molested as a kid, and that any sense of worth that I had, which was very little, was at that point, I just didn't even know how to identify with. I didn't have language for it. I was just a scared kid. And so what ended up happening is I became a teenager. I was in constant stages of anxiety all the time, fearful. A lot of bad things happen in church. I would pray to a God that I never felt I was connected with. It was just awful. And so I became a drug addict, and I started smoking pot early on in school. And by the time I was 18 years old, I was, freebasing cocaine. And there was one period of time when I was 18 years old, right out of high school, where every single day for 3.5 months, I was smoking coke. That's what freebasing is. And there was one day, crazy story that I remember, where I had done LSD, I was drinking alcohol, I was smoking cigarettes, I was snorting cocaine, I was snorting crystal meth, and I was freebasing all in the same day. And I was a complete wreck. And so at that time, I weighed about 120 pounds was my average weight. And I'm, when you're 5'10" and you're male, anyway, it's pretty skinny. And there was one week where I barely ate anything. I was just doing speed and doing coke the whole week, and I weighed myself, and I weighed 105 pounds. And so my eyes were sunken in. I looked terrible. And people would tell me, that would be at the house, and all of us are doing drugs together, because when you're in that type of life, all your relationships, are circled around that sort of behavior. And so I was dealing drugs in order to get drugs, and that's kind of how I lived. And people would tell me, man, you really need help. It would just piss me off. I mean, I was just like, don't tell me what to do. And so everything was a reaction, everything was fear. And so what I ended up doing, there was this major blow up. A guy came, a roommate, and I was living with my brother and this other person. And there was constant drugs being done in the house. People coming over, we'd go to other places. And this guy came I was watching TV with a friend, and he bust into the, literally, it was almost like the cops were breaking into the house, and just screaming. And he had a can of lighter fluid and just starts spraying it everywhere. He's like, I don't know if I can cuss on this show, but he's like, I'm gonna burn this effing place, just screaming. And I had long hair at the time, and this guy's spraying lighter fluid all over the place, and some of it gets on my head, and he pulls out a lighter. He's like, I'm gonna torch this freaking place. And it's like a scene out of a crazy movie. And I'm saying, put the lighter down, turn it off. And I talked him, out of but he was ready to just burn the whole place. And at that point, I was like, if I don't get out of here, I'm gonna die. I mean, I'm gonna kill myself with drugs. And so I packed up the belongings I had, moved to New Mexico, where my father was living by himself in a trailer, and I went to New Mexico. And I went to New Mexico State University, as the story I was telling back then, but I was really just escaping doing drugs, and I ended up getting sober. And while one of the jobs I got there was selling gym memberships. And it was so funny, because I'm this skinny guy that really wasn't working out, but I ended up getting a job selling gym memberships, and I started exercising. And I became the top salesperson at this gym in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And then I met a person there that was running a mental hospital, and they offered me a job as a mental health tech. And so when I when I started working there, one of the things they would have me do is drive patients to AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous, CA meetings, Cocaine Anonymous, and NA meetings, Narcotics Anonymous. And I would sit in those meetings as an employee of this mental health institute, and I started to listen. And I didn't realize how important that would become later to me in life, the community aspects of 12 steps, because 12 steps are great for community. There's a lot of things, they're not the end all be all. A lot of people don't like 12-step groups, but most people that don't like them, they haven't done the steps and they haven't got a sponsor, because most people that do those things, even if they don't love it, they get improvement. And it's free and it's available to most people. So that was my first exposure. But yeah, and I was in there for a couple of years, and then I came back to Arizona and been here ever since.
And so but you always had this natural sort of sales, kind of convincing personality, I guess.
Well,
right?
here's the thing. I have a friend named Dean Jackson, who is, we've been doing a podcast called I Love Marketing for years. And he invented in 1997 what's called like the squeeze page, where you put your name and email, or your name and then your email, and then it opens up the next page, which has now become the modern day opt-in page that people use for lead generation. Right. And he has a great line where he says, a compelling offer is 10 times more powerful than a convincing argument. So I always try to help business owners and entrepreneurs think of, don't try to convince somebody into anything, try to compel them. Because when you're trying to convince, then it feels like someone's trying to pressure you. You know, it goes back to what I said earlier. People love to be sold, they hate to be pressured. And so part of it, I wasn't very good at sales. I was actually terrible at it. I was scared to talk to people. I didn't really know what to do. It wasn't until I started reading really good old school marketing books that I started to understand writing sales copy, creating compelling offers, using headlines, using emotional language, and setting things up to attract people. Because everything that I say, you say, anyone says is either going to attract someone or repel them. So
I was just thinking that, selling gym memberships would kind of be like my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Right. Like.
Yeah.
So, but somehow you succeeded.
Well, let me talk about that as it relates to. I got to mention this too. I hardly ever talk about this. If you look up the old manuscript of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill W. and Dr. Bob, famous. This is like the Bible of addiction recovery in the 12-step community. The original manuscript says sell all throughout. Bill W. was a stockbroker. He and he wrote the Big Book, and they had him change it because they thought the term sell would make people think we're trying to convince you to do something. It's fascinating. So that book was written by a salesperson. And so in a lot of ways, we're all selling in our heads. If you've ever gone to a movie or you've gone to a restaurant or you read a book, and there's this funny video. If anyone goes online and types in, is selling evil, I think that alone will pull it up, or is selling evil Joe Polish, my name like nail polish. There's a 3-minute and 52-second clip of a video that was B-roll for a documentary I was being filmed for, and this footage never showed up in the documentary. But one of the guys that works for me named JR thought, wow, that's a really good riff. And I talk about, is selling evil. Well, it depends. There's Hitler was effective at selling. He was effective at convincing people, but what he did was not helpful. So I have this definition that I love from my friend Dan Sullivan, who you've met before. He's a founder of a company called Strategic Coach. And I asked him years ago, what's your definition of selling? And he said, selling is getting someone intellectually engaged in a future result that's good for them and getting them to emotionally commit to take action to achieve that result. And I memorized that line because I was like, okay, getting people intellectually engaged in a future result that's good for them and getting them to emotionally commit to take action to achieve that result. And I'll ask people, what do you think is the most important words in that sentence? And people say engage or commit. And I'm like, well, if you're talking about ethics, it's good for them.
Right.
Because you can get people intellectually engaged in a future result that's not good for them, that kills people. And that's the propaganda and so many things you cover to expose all these people that are bad actors, these people that are...
Except, I have to jump in here because what I've kind of come to the conclusion of is that, unfortunately, a lot of the people, there's this famous C.S. Lewis quote, right? I don't remember the exact, but to paraphrase, the people that torment us for our own good are the worst. It's better told than that. But there's a lot of people out there that seem to be in positions of authority and power that seem to truly believe they know better
Oh yeah.
what's good for us, and are very happy to insist on affecting that on the population.
Absolutely.
Right? So they'll say, no, this is for your own good, Joe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yes, and that's
Okay.
complicated. Because it's like, no, you're right.
But I love that definition, by the way. But I can't help but think about those people who really believe they have not just the good idea, but the right to impose it on you.
Totally.
Right?
And so here's how I try to come to grips with that for myself, because I believe almost everyone thinks they're right. People constantly think they're right, even when they're dead wrong, including there's many times in my life, in the past and probably in the future, well, I will be convinced that I'm right. And what being in recovery has really helped me with over the years is helping me, at least when I'm thinking from my higher self, that to have some awareness that I could be completely full of crap. I could be I could think. So you know that line, Stephen Covey has said it, I've heard other people say it, is people judge themselves by their intentions, they judge others by their actions. And I was in a room with a friend of mine, and there's a small group of people, and he said, how many of you in this room have ever been screwed by other people? So a good portion of the people raised their hand. He's like, okay, how many of you have ever screwed somebody else? A couple people raised their hand. He's like, isn't that interesting? So most of you think someone screwed you, but you don't see how you screwed other people. He goes, and the reason is because we judge ourselves by our intentions, we judge others by their actions. So look, Anthony Fauci, okay, so he probably thinks in his mind what he's doing is the right thing. I mean, I can name a bunch of who I consider tyrants and people that clearly I think are not doing humanity any good, and in many cases people that I consider mass murderers. And in their minds, they think they're right. They have a justification for it. And so one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, right? That's that line. And it's difficult, it's complex, because we have to look at what is the byproduct of our actions. Are our actions helping ourselves? Are they helping other people? Are they hurting them? Where do you think, unlearning is actually more important than learning.
Well, and the other thing that's very, I guess, important to also your group, if I think about it, right, is that this is probably an obvious phenomenon, okay, but if we're, let's say, financially motivated to hold a belief, it's a lot harder for us to shake that belief, even if it's false.
Absolutely.
And this is something I realized about myself. I'm unusually not financially motivated. If you take across the average of people, some people are incredibly, other people here, this has never been something that's been a focus for me. So it just didn't really occur to me, right, so much. But I see that prominently. I see people, sort of taking strong, an example might be, right, TikTok, right? There's this app that's in effect controlled by the Chinese regime, which seeks to destroy, free society, not to put it too glibly, but, a lot of Western, very kind of prominent Western people, I think, that are kind of on its side, believe that they should be, because it's, they'll imagine maybe it's a free speech issue primarily, or something. But there's a kind of, but then you look a little closer, you can see, well, but I can also see why you might want to hold that position, even if I believe you that this isn't purely self-interest, or and you see what I mean?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So this factors in too. Very well-meaning, right? I'm not even talking about the person who imagines themselves a tyrant, or even is one, really, right, in their disposition.
Well, yeah, it's complicated. I heard Jordan Peterson. One of his talks where he was saying, some questions can't be answered right away. Some take hours, some take days, some take weeks, some take lifetimes. And some of these, there's a lot of things that's really hard to soundbite, and you get to someone's motives, and you get to, I look at my latest book. I've written 5 books. My latest book is called What's in It for Them? And the question, what's in it for them, is if someone never reads the book, just the line, that's sort of how I have lived my life. I think no one really cares about me. They care about themselves. Now, certainly people do care about me, and thank God there are humans that care about others. I would look at you, for as long as I've known you, you do things because you actually care about other humans. Talking about being of service to other people. There's something that comes, like one of the things I learned early on is if I feel my life sucks, because I have been suicidal. I've had guns in my mouth. I've done things that I'm lucky I did not die. I've put myself in extremely dangerous situations. I have done some really stupid stuff. And when I feel my life sucks, I've been in the middle of what many people would consider paradise and could not see the beauty in it, could not feel the joy, have been so depleted. And when I put myself in a situation where go and help someone who's doing as bad or worse than me, it's bizarre how good it is at lifting you out of a difficult situation. May not solve it, but it certainly makes it better. So I believe that we really become are better versions of ourselves when we become of service. And if people are constantly taking, one of the things that's hard for people is they'll see people in very high levels of position in pharmacy, government, central banking, tech, that are rich, that are wealthy, that are making a lot of money, that have enormous power and enormous status, enormous respect, and they're doing awful stuff. And it's hard for people that are givers to be like, life is so not fair. Like, how is this happening? Do I have to become like that? And that is something that I think we all grapple with.
The big question, I mean, this isn't an easy question, right? Because how do you help someone see something that I could think of probably 15 things that even 2 years ago I was pretty sure about were one way, and today,
right?
Like, for example, what is a good route for cancer treatment? This is something that I've been thinking about a lot with Dr. Paul Merrick's recent monograph on cancer and so forth. I mean, I couldn't grasp that there's a whole plethora of deeply researched work that you could apply yourself without even a doctor's help to help prevent and treat cancer. It's astonishing. Right. I just couldn't even imagine it a couple of years ago until I was forced to face it, I guess, but by seeing the evidence in front of me. Well, but to facilitate that for people that might not necessarily want to.
Yeah,
it's a tough thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
and you can't be the coercive tyrant, right? You don't want to.
Right. Yeah. It's like, do you force people to pay attention? Doing things right versus doing the right things are two completely different stuff. So I often think of there's a right way to screw people over, but is it the right thing to screw people over, right? And so there's a book, I'm not going to say the quote right, but my brain remembers dirty jokes and quotes. It's really weird. It was called The Book of Survival, and it was written in the 90s, and the quote goes along the lines of, in order to get through an impossible situation, you don't need the reflexes of a Grand Prix driver, the muscles of a Hercules, the mind of an Einstein. You simply need to know what to do. And let's take cancer as an example. There was another quote years ago. It's like, they'll never find a cure for cancer because 4 times as many people make a living off of it than die from it every year. And as you know, if you just follow the money, that explains so much.
That's that issue, right? But because you can be blinded to very good solutions if you're financially motivated. It goes back to that same issue.
Right.
Even or you could just want the money. There's certainly a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and is that bad? Is pursuing money bad, or is the way you go about pursuing money bad? Is it greed? Is it just I'm willing to do whatever it takes, including hurting other people? And what is someone's motivation? I mean, the ego, the reactive, the pain body, to use an Eckhart Tolle term, is quite prevalent. I mean, I can view the whole pandemic through the lens of addiction, a lot of power addiction. Because what is addiction? Addiction is doing something you want to do or that you don't want to do, that you cannot stop and control, that has negative consequences. So I think the world is being run by people that are highly addicted. at very high levels. I mean, even Nazi Germany invented crystal meth. I mean, the majority of the Nazi army was being given, I believe they called it perpetine, and including Hitler, and it's documented. There's movies about this. Hi Hitler's a video someone can watch on YouTube. Hitler's Secret Drug Habits, the book Buzzed, Drugs in the Third Reich, and when you give crystal meth to people for long periods of time, research has now shown that it removes empathy. So their ability to have concentration camps and to do awful things to people is because they zap their empathy.
This is astonishing. I have not heard of any of this. This is I'm definitely going to be doing some fact checks on that.
No, please do.
I'm teasing. I believe you, right?
Yeah.
Just wow.
Everything I just said, watch those movies,
Yeah.
Read the book.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
made a movie about
Yeah.
that. And this is documented, and no one tells that story. Hardcore History had an episode where I think the night before the Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon was, pretty much whacked out on opiates. Winston Churchill was constantly intoxicated. There's a lot of things in history of inebriation. And pre-pandemic, I think it was, and don't quote me exact on this, I think it was like 20% of American women were estimated to be on antidepressants pre-pandemic. So we are living in a inebriated world.
Well, and the other thing I wanted to add is I just actually had Dr. Michael Nels on the show, and one of the things we discussed is how this, what you would glibly call fear porn, right?
Yes.
The sort of constant, incessant pushing on fear actually has a profoundly negative impact on our cognition, and specifically on the hippocampus, which is very important to our, decision making, our autobiographical memory, and so forth. Never mind, all these different environmental agents that are neuropathogenic, including things like even the spike protein and so forth, right? So this is very interesting. I just thinking about these methed out, Germans. It's crazy.
I bet you if you look at every Ukraine and Russia right now, I bet you the amount of amphetamines, because when they would give the Nazi Germany army methamphetamines, they would fight more aggressively, they would sleep less, they would eat less. Feeding soldiers is a big deal. And if you can suppress that appetite and have them become more violent and more aggressive, and you don't really care the consequences, you just want to, conquer, seek and destroy,
But in the process, you basically destroy your population.
Yes.
Again, this definitely going to be looking into this further. I want to, I don't want us to run out of time. I want to make sure that we talk about your, how you understand addiction, actually, because it's not a typical way. You've come to this, I guess, through understanding the hard way, right, so to speak. And you are actually, you've developed a structure, this Genius Recovery Network, that's actually helping people.
I hope so.
Quite a number of people.
Yeah.
Right. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So Genius Recovery, I created. It started back in 2015. I was doing a Genius Network annual event, and I decided to get up on stage. I was nervous as hell because I was like, this line I heard a million times, you're as sick as your secrets. And I've heard that, but it's like silent battles are the hardest battles to fight. And I had been in recovery for many years, but I was still, the drugs was easier than sexual addiction. Sex addiction, and so people are like, what's sex addiction? So I was paid money to not say anything when I was a kid, and it wired in my head that sex is shameful and dirty unless you pay for it. I didn't view, my father never remarried, I didn't see relationships or sexual as being an intimate act of love and oneness. I looked at it as something you do to get off. I was introduced to sexuality in a very humiliating, degrading, filthy way. And so when I finally shared my story publicly, I was like, this is either going to ruin my career but screw it. I'm sick of, I think this is important. For whatever reason, I felt it was important. So I started, this was the seed of what became geniusrecovery.org, which is my 501c3 that we have now. And so I shared the story, and I had men and women, very successful ones, come up to me. I've sold my body, a couple of women have told me. Men, I'm an addict, I'm a porn addict, I'm doing drugs, all this sort of stuff. And I was like, wow, talking about this publicly, I I now realize that which we think is most private is most public. You think you're the only one that's dealing with it, a lot of other people. So I created Genius Recovery with the goal of changing, so my goal is to change the global conversation about how people view and treat addicts with compassion instead of judgment, and find the best forms of treatment that have efficacy and share it with the world. So currently in its current state, it's an educational platform. We don't have a treatment facility, we educate people. So videos, links to where to go get help and support. We have a really cool recovery bot that we have been testing. We haven't made it prime time yet, where people can obviously text and talk to it, and it's really helpful to guide and direct, and we are getting ready to start putting out physical recovery kits. So what I have learned by lots of interviews, lots of conversations, even talking about this, so I even appreciate you bringing this up. This just hopefully gets this message out to more people, to don't look at yourself, if you're struggling with addiction, or a family member, as a moral degenerate. Look at them as a person that's in pain. I have a friend, Gabor Mate, who I've done a couple interviews with, and Gabor has this great line where he says, don't ask the question, why the addiction, but why the pain? So addiction is a response to pain. It is a connection disorder. The opposite of addiction is connection. So if you feel disconnected as a person, you're going to look for other ways to connect. One of my favorite lines from Bill W., the founder of AA, one of the founders, he said, as alcoholics, we're trying to drink God out of a bottle. So even if you're an atheist, you understand what that means. We're trying to find meaning. We're trying to connect with source. So you're either trying to drink your way to God, metaphorically, snort your way to God, gamble your way to God, game your way to God, porn your way to God, screw your way to God. I mean, eat your way, if it's food addiction. So there's all these ways that we try to scratch the itch, and they work. Addiction is a solution. I view addiction as a solution. It's a solution to pain.
They work, kind of.
Yeah, that's the caveat. They work in the moment, but they have consequences. So if they, it's like going back to doing something that you want to do or don't want to do that has negative consequences, and you can't stop. So it's this compulsivity attached to it. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to be out of pain if you're depressed, if you're lonely, if you're sad, if you're anxious. There's nothing wrong with wanting that to go away. But if the way you're scratching the itch is ruining your life, destroying your life, hurting other people, because in an active state, addicts lie, cheat, and steal. You cannot not do that.
Well, because it's this compulsion that you can't never really satiate. It just keeps coming back, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's an addictive cycle. A way to think about it is people often think it's the drugs or the porn or the violence or the gambling or whatever the thing is, and that's how you act out. That's how you do the thing. But what really consumes the mind of addiction, the addict mind, and addiction is cultural in many ways, is it starts with preoccupation, where you're thinking about it. You're thinking about the stuff, the thing that makes you feel good, that dopamine hit, that high. Then there's ritualization, where your life is built around the ritual. Then there's the compulsive act, the drinking, the drugging, the porn, the gambling. And then once you do that, you go into a state of despair. And when you're in despair, you feel shame and you feel guilt. Guilt is, I regret what I did. I wish I didn't do that. Shame, like I feel bad. Shame is, I am bad. It's this identification that I am bad. And when you're in despair, in feeling shame, guilt, horrible, one of the best ways that the addict mind addresses it is to start the whole damn cycle all over again. Start thinking about it, ritualization, and that's why they can't get out of that addiction loop unless you put yourself into a different environment. So what I've learned is that in order to get sober and stay sober, if you want to use the word sober, because there's a lot of dry drunks in the world. Dry drunks are people that they quit drinking, but they haven't dealt with the underlying relationship issues which caused them to drink in the first place, so the drinking's this one part of recovery. It's the dealing with the relationship with yourself and with others. So the first thing that people need is they need community. No one, like I said earlier, you're as sick as your secrets. Silent battles is the hardest battles to fight. So you need some form of community. 12 Steps has done the best job worldwide because it's free. It's only, it's run by the voluntary contributions of its members, so people can donate, and that's how it keeps going. And it's pretty accessible in most places. And now if anyone has access online, if you can't get to a physical meeting, there's tons of that. And there's many non-12-step communities too for addiction recovery. There is a lot of help out there. Most people just don't know it exists. So the first thing is community. The second, it's biochemical. It's serotonin, it's dopamine. My friend Dr. Anna Lemke wrote an amazing book called Dopamine Nation. If anyone wants to really understand the biochemical aspects of addiction, that's a great book. You know, what you eat, what you put in your body, sunshine, water intake. I mean, all these things affect you. The third is the underlying trauma work. That's where breathing, meditation, EMDR, the proper use, and I emphasize this, of plant medicines and psychedelics. Very valuable if done, to use the old Timothy Leary line in the 50s, set and setting, with the right mindset and the right setting. Somatic therapy, anything that gets you into a physical engage, the issues are in the tissues. So exercise, doing things with your body, yoga, trauma release exercise, free. You can learn how to do trauma release exercises. Written book, a couple books written, but you can find videos online. David Berceli, he's a 70-year-old man right now who invented this process just to help people. It costs nothing, trauma release exercises. And then the fourth is the environment, based on the rat park studies that were done by Dr. Bruce Alexander. And that was, if you put a rat in a cage, given the choice of regular water and drug water, most rats will consume the drugs over food, over sex, over sleep. But if you put them into a more healthy environment that's enjoyable with other rats in companionship, given the choice of regular water and drug water, they won't drink the drug water. Even if you give drugs to them, most of them will not drink the drug water unless those rats are traumatized. So I go back and forth. I believe a lot of addiction is a response to trauma. I'm definitely from that school of thought. And I also know that there's a lot of people that have not been severely traumatized, but they've been exposed to, it's biochemical. Right. A lot of people like opiates. I recently interviewed Robert Kennedy Jr. You were there actually. Yeah. And he made the analogy that in America, every year, we had 50,000 soldiers die in Vietnam. And we have 2 Vietnams every year that are happening in America.
That's right.
190 people a day, approximately, and it's rising, are dying from opiate addictions alone. It's the equivalent of a plane crash every single day. Right. And if there was a plane crash every single day in America, it would be on the news nonstop.
And it's probably a combination of both, but also the fact that it's kind of, I would argue, being enabled again by the Chinese regime, where all these precursors, come from, and
fentanyl.
Say, sure, we'll work on stopping it, and nothing changes. That's how it's been. So
that conversation, and you even bringing that up, is so important for people not to brush to the side. This is by design. They want people, and they is the key word here. Who are the they, right? Groups. It is insidious, it is evil, it is awful, it's horrible, and there's lots of people in pain. So what I hope is that we can, for one, change the global conversation to how people, because one of my lines that I do my best to emphasize is you cannot punish pain out of people. Throwing someone with addiction into prison or into jail, or looking at them as a moral degenerate, even though you could be very pissed at them, I understand, addicts are difficult. They're a pain in the butt. They lie, they cheat, they steal. And to bring love and compassion with someone who's stealing from you, lying to you, misleading you, the symptoms of addiction are they do bad stuff. Not always, but some of the most creative, loving, caring people, addiction is just, it's a reverse way. Let me say this, it's an intimacy disorder for sexual addiction. And my favorite definition of intimacy was given to me by an 80-year-old gay man who spends his life for free helping people that struggle with sexual addiction. And he said to me years ago, never met this guy in person, just over the phone, because a friend I had been sponsoring in a 12-step group had introduced me to this guy, said, you got to talk to him. And he said, intimacy is a mutual exploration of a shared safe place. Abuse is anything that takes away the safe place, and addictions are what we do to make ourselves feel good when we don't have a safe place. So if you don't feel safe in the world, you're going to look for a way to scratch the itch. And we don't feel safe in the world most of the time if you're watching media or if you're living in any sort of environment. War, tyranny, communism, where people are wanting to oppress you, don't feel safe. And if you keep people in a state of, use the term fear porn, it's actually a great term. I mean, you constantly hit people with fear porn, they become addicted to it. We're culturally addicted to war. And therefore you manufacture addiction. Then you provide fentanyl, and you provide all these opiates, and you can kill populations, you can control them. It is another form of slavery. I think we will look back at this, hopefully, if
we make it out.
If we make it out.
Right?
Yeah.
We've got a big road.
And that's why I think anyone that comes from this place of compassion and empathy, and they do their best to live their life that way and be of service to other people and speak to it. I mean, you're doing very important work here. I'm not just saying that to edify you and be like, Jan, you're doing good. I'm not saying, like, this is important stuff. This is important conversation. Most people are scared to address topics, and they try to cancel, they try to oppress, they try to stop these sort of messages, and those people are addicts. Those people that are true, their hit is controlling and hurting other people, because hurt people hurt others. And not always. There are many hurt people that don't hurt other people. There are people that are hurt that are the most caring, kindest, compassionate individuals, and those are the ones that I admire, people that have been through hell. Because people say, man, Joe, you've done a lot of stuff and you're helping, and I'm like, I meet people every day that have gone through stuff, that are still loving, caring, compassionate people that I can't even imagine how they overcame some of the stuff they do.
Right.
Awful stuff. I meet men and women that were, sold into sexual slavery, that were abused continuously, that were just lived such pain lives, and these angels come out of these individuals. They're not perfect. Most of them have a lot of scar tissue, mentally and physically, but they just, they have somehow just, they're still pure.
Well, I was very lucky to have a person like this. And I'll say as we finish up here, but I was very lucky to have, my wife's father, who passed a couple of years ago, but he survived Buchenwald, and was able to move on. Of course, there was a lot of pain. It just wasn't the only concentration camp. It wasn't the only hell. We actually made a film about it, Finding Manny, here on EpochTV. I'll recommend to people to watch that film. But he was able to move on and create, great lives for a great many people through his, generosity, hard work, and frankly, entrepreneurship. He was a genius entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I guess we've come full circle here.
Yeah. It all ties together. There are, a lot of the entrepreneurs in the world are struggling with addiction, and so, but you know what it boils down to? Connection. When my life works, I'm responding to life, which is responding with ability. That's what responsibility is. When my life is not working, I'm reacting. So I created Genius Network as a connection network. I created Genius Recovery as a way to help people with connection and to help, again, look at their own addictions. And we want to put as much useful information out to the groups I want to be a hero to. I want to be a hero to the legitimate, ethical, awesome entrepreneurs. And I want to be a hero to people that struggle with addiction, because I am both of those things, and I think that's a really important, for my skill set, it makes me feel good, it helps me do a lot of good work in the world, and I hope to, because it's about connection, and so that's my word.
Well, Joe Polish, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thank you. So great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining Joe Polish and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.